If I were the devil and I wanted to ruin the world, I'd start by getting rid of the aesthetic faculty, and that'll give me the chance to go after the moral faculty, and then I can go after the epistemological faculty, because I have a hunch that that's further still. If you want to topple the whole system, start with aesthetics. That you can get rid of pretty quick, and I think history's shown societies start there. Then you can get rid of ethics. Then you get rid of epistemology, and then you're in the kind of situation we're seeing in society.
What would be good parameters you could give to people who might want to arrange some spirituals?
Every composer is going to have to just come up with some parameters, but always in the context of love. I don't mean that in a corny way. I mean loving as in love the song. Don't arrange it if you don't love it. But if you love it, love its background. If you love its background, as far as you can understand, love the people who sang it. Be fascinated. Be humble. Step one, you memorize the song. I can't believe how many arrangers skip the fundamental step of learning the song they're arranging, especially student. They just want to get right to it. So they start harmonizing. But what they need to do is memorize the whole song.
Hello, everyone. Today I would like to welcome Dr. John Wykoff, who was actually my first composition professor at Lee University. You know, I often feel like music theory is taught in a way where it's music theory for music theory's sake, but precisely because he is a composer himself, it seemed that the way he taught music theory actually elucidated both how to compose music and, even as a non-composer, how to interpret music that had been composed, where it was always, let's analyze the music so that we understand the music of it, not just create something random out of it that we can write a paper out of. And so I very much appreciated that. He would invite some of his students over for dinner, and I remember there was one time that we was saying "Abide with Me" at dinner in 4-part harmony, and I had never done that before. I thought, wow, that's a beautiful thing, a group of Christians singing around the dinner table.
Right.
And he was always, I must say, you were always very outspoken about your faith in a way that you weren't apologetic about it. Now, granted, we were at a Christian school, so I guess it's a little bit different than being in a secular university, but still, you know, you're Presbyterian rather than Pentecostal, and you would but weren't ashamed to talk about Christianity the way that you saw it. And it was always, it never felt like a superficial, like, imposition upon what you were talking about. It was totally cogent with whatever the subject material was. And so, anyway, that I always appreciated that. And so, thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been a few years since you took music theory.
Yes, it has. Yeah, that was 2011 or something like that. So
I love what you said about. I love that you remember singing around the table. It's something we love to do. I wish more people did. It drives right at the heart of what I think music is primarily, which is music is something human beings do together. And I've recently wondered whether the various troubles that we encounter, whether it's music in the church or music in schools, declines that people talk about, have more to do with thinking of music as anything but what humans do together. Whether it's thinking of music primarily as something sitting on a page, like Alice Parker was fond of always talking about, or whether it's thinking of music as a commodity to be purchased primarily, or whether thinking of music as a means of evangelism or anything like that, rather than music is a human activity that humans do together, like eating around a table. And the more human we make it, the more music becomes natural and lovable and enjoyable. And so I'm glad you remember that. We still do that.
That's great. That's great. Speaking of Alice Parker, so
Mhm.
what's your relationship with Alice Parker? And I understand Alice Parker is amazing, but I don't really understand why Alice Parker is amazing. So maybe you can it's sort of one of those I can take it for granted that so many musicians that I know who I super well respect are in love with Alice Parker. But I guess I haven't had enough of an exposure to really know. So
Right, right. Well, there's much to say about that.
hey, hit that like button.
And I think it's because Alice Parker is best known as a person and not as a name. She has some very good books, but I think the first thing that like most people, the first knowledge of Alice was as a composer, singing her music, singing her arrangements and her compositions. And that's how I first fell in love with Alice Parker, because her music stood out to me in a unique way. Um, let's just take her choral arrangements, which are so widely performed. They have a kind of perfection to them that is pure. Her music always struck me as devoid of sentimentality. They're not technical compositions. Like she's not some contrapuntist, though she's classically trained. She's certainly competent, but she never has these flashes of compositional technique where you say, wow, now that is a composer. Rather, what she always has done was present music lovingly as something to be received, and she does that so uniquely. Her arrangements, to me, which are the model for so many, are the example, because with so many arrangers, what what you're given is the technique of a composer or an arranger, and the song that they're arranging, the music, gets buried underneath it. And so, with corny modulations, or with flashy overwrought counterpoint, or with accompaniments that are so designed to highlight the composer, that
Mhm.
the music gets lost. And Alice Parker never does that. Her arrangements always are more like a loving curation of a song that ought to be heard. And I love that about her music. But when I got to know her at some point, because she was invited to Lee, and I got to interview her, but then we had her for dinner, and that was the first time I really got to know her. Was Cameron LaBar, whom you know, I think. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cameron LaBar and Susan LaBar, editor of Walton Music. Cameron, the choral director at Missouri State University, and a former colleague of mine, a good friend. We had Alice over to our house to have a dinner like we love to do in our dining room. And there's my wife, Evangeline, and me, and Alice, and Cameron, and Susan, and we had a wonderful dinner with great human conversation and laughter. And then, of course, because for us it's as natural as eating, we began singing together, and we got out hymnals and we sang through hymns. And then Alice Parker has written a hymnal. It's the Melodious Accord hymnal, which is mostly just uh, manageable versions of all her favorite arrangements, and but like uh, so we had that out, and we got that out, and we began singing, and we sang. And at that point Alice was already well into her 80s. She might have been 90, I'm not sure. She might have been 80s, late 80s, but she was a mature woman. And uh and we got late into the night, and it was not Alice, it was Cameron who said, Alice, we got to go to bed. Because music and singing just energized her. And that was a formative memory, because of the humanity of just singing together around a table with her and having conversation and eating together. It's all one of the same. It's all of a piece. And so that's a good memory. But your that desire to know Alice better, but not have, now that she's deceased, it's particularly difficult to know her. So Cameron and I, we knew that, and there are a few people that got to go to her house to do composition workshops or conducting workshops or song leading workshops, but that's so few people that have that opportunity. I had the opportunity to do one of her composition workshops, and it was wonderful, a delightful experience because of its humanity and the way she teaches. But not
Eric
everybody
did
get.
as well. The guy who brought me down to Charleston,
Yes.
Eric Wise, he also did one of those workshops. But when I asked him what was so great about it, his answer was like, "Oh, it was great. We sang, and it was beautiful,
Right.
and we had time together." And I'm like, "This doesn't tell me anything."
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, because you don't get connected to her. And that was the problem that Cameron and I had noticed, is that, boy, it's very hard to describe it. So we thought the best thing we could do was to try in some way to recreate the experience for people. And so we decided, we got some funding from GIA. I say we, I think Dr. Labar did most of the heavy lifting on this. Got some funding from GIA to get a cameraman and the two of us to go and do an extended 3-day interview at her house. Hours and hours and hours of footage and audio recording and video recording of just conversation and music.
Hmm.
And we transcribed it and edited it lightly, edited it enough to make it readable, but we edited it into a book, which is called which is called subtitled "Conversations with Alice Parker." The melodic voice. That's what it's called. The melodic voice. Conversations with Alice Parker, and it's in an interview format, edited so that it's readable. We did 3 days of interviews, but really trying to keep faithful to the conversational manner. So we left in some of her wit, and we, but but and it comes with footage, but we intended that to be some approximation. So the real way to try to catch it is just to read that book as though you're there at the table having a conversation. Because Alice
Okay.
is kind of like an Emily Dickinson of music. She's this figure that you almost have to go to her home to really to really know her. Uh, though her books are wonderful, her music's wonderful, her recordings are good. But she's influenced so many people.
And you've arranged a bunch of spirituals and stuff like Beautiful Morning, I think is super well known
So
that you've done. Is
I've done
that
some, and most of them have her DNA in there too. Though I'm a different composer, and I'm a contrapuntalist. um, but uh, but
so what about those arrangements would be inspired from her, and what about it would be your particular voice?
well, I'll take one as an example, and it's one of the first I did after getting to know her. Um, and it's "Look Up, Look Down," that lonesome road.
Mm-hmm.
Look up, look down. And the real trick there was to suppress compositional technique in the sense of, you can take a simple thing and you can compose the guts out of it. If that's not a real verb, but the tune itself is a kind of gem. It's in Mixolydian mode, so you're dealing with this flat 7. It's so austere, it only has a few notes, a fifth, and then rising to the flat 7, and then back to the fifth until it descends with very little space, very little motivic material. So the goal is, what can the temptation for most arrangers would be, all right, well, I can harmonize that. I'm going to get some real clever harmonies in there, and some surprising chords, and add some rich, which is fine. That's its own thing, but that's burying the tune, not curating it. And the goal is to lift up the tune lovingly, let the composer be kind of an art curator and show you a song that some anonymous person sang. And so drawing the material entirely from the tune without harmonizing it, letting the tune itself. And so Look Up, Look Down would be an example of how Alice Parker very much influenced my thinking about what to do with a tune.
Okay. Were you about to say something else?
Only that I haven't actually done very many, partly because arranging, that's a lot of work, but it's also, I also like to, I do like to,
Write your own stuff.
write my own things and write counterpoint and dense technique and 20th century things. So, and I do like harmony. So if I'm going to lovingly curate things, it actually limits me in ways that I don't always love to be limited.
It does beg the question, though, like, just speaking of arranging and that sort of thing, it does seem a lot of the spiritual arrangements that I've heard, just to put it frankly, I hate them. It takes something that's like a black spiritual that is supposed to have soul and angst and, and then it's just kind of banal, So I don't know how to I suppose some of the Moses Hogan is good and fine,
Arranger.
but it's those are probably some of the only arrangements I've heard that I didn't just automatically despise. And so, what advice might you have out there for people who, because for example, there are a ton of Gullah spirituals that are native to the Low Country, to Charleston. There is the question of should you sing them in Gullah, which I think immediately comes across weird to people, like if you have like a white choir singing Gullah spirituals in Gullah. But there's also a pretty good argument to be made, like, well, they were sung in Gullah, so you should sing them in Gullah,
Right.
But if you were to take a Gullah spiritual, what would your approach be, or what would be some good parameters you could give to people who might want to arrange some spirituals like that?
That is a difficult, challenging question that any arranger of songs that have a particular dialect to them has to face. Do you say soon will be done, and what are you going to do? Are you going to spell it out to try to insist that the choir adopt a pretense of a dialect, or do you let the conductor try to coach them in it, or do you say, I have no idea what kind of choir is going to sing this. I'm just going to present it as authentically as I can. But then you have the problem of what in the world does authentic mean in this context? There's all kinds of conundrums that every composer is going to have to just come up with some parameters, but always in the context of love. I don't mean that in a corny way. I mean loving as in love the song. Don't arrange it if you don't love it. But if you love it, love its background. If you love its background, as far as you can understand, love the people who sang it. Be fascinated, be humble. And, Alice would, if she was going to arrange something, if she had the time, she would just let the song, step one, you memorize the song. I can't believe how many arrangers skip the fundamental step of learning the song they're arranging, especially student. They just want to get right to it. So they start harmonizing. But what they need to do is memorize the whole song, research it down to its core. And Alice would spend lots of time, and she would sing the song to herself for months before she even dared to try to do something with it. Because then the song actually kind of starts presenting itself to you. It sounds a little corny or it sounds hokey, but it's true. Memorize the song and sing it to yourself. Sing it with other people. Sing it in context if it's a real song. But yeah, I'd say in the context of love means that you should you have to understand a song if you're going to arrange it. Now I'm talking about a kind of art arranging. I'm not talking about business arranging where there's no time for that. If you're in the business of arranging, you got to get stuff out there, and that's true. And a lot of publishers and a lot of churches, of course, that's the business. And so I'm not really speaking to that angle. where, hey, let's get it out there, let's sell some octavos and get some recordings, and that's a different conception. I'm talking about a different sort of thing here. But yeah, that would be some advice I'd give. Start with love by, and then you're going to have to set for yourself parameters. What are you going to do? Uh, what is meant by authentic?
Mm.
But it's not authentic already, because you yourself, if you're arranging anything that's outside of your own experience, um, well, there is a kind of breaking of authenticity, which of course we know in recent years people have strongly objected to. I don't. I think that's a mistake to somehow limit yourself, for fear of rude appropriation. People have begun to limit themselves to things only in their immediate experience. I think that's a mistake. I think if you start with love, um, and you avoid, and as best as you can, you avoid harming, you avoid, ru- uh what's a word beyond rude, but more than
Offending.
rude.
Yeah.
Offending is tricky because that depends on somebody else's perception. I don't know. You can be good and offend people. Jesus was terribly offensive, and they shouldn't have been offended at him. For which
Fair
of my
enough.
for which of my good deeds are you offended? But
No, but I love this philosophy with it, like to love. I mean, a couple things with regards to that. Like I have a architectural design friend, and he said you should never innovate to innovate. Almost all bad art comes from innovation for innovation's sake. You want to innovate, you just love two things really well, and you will naturally create something new. You love Japanese architecture and American colonial architecture, and you're just obsessed with both of them. And then you don't try to innovate, and you'll naturally create something that's uniquely you, and people will love it. You know?
that is an excellent thought. Uh, and it also it forestalls this kind of. Uh, I remember one of my professors told in doctoral days was bemoaning a kind of collage art that is simplistic, which is innovate for innovate, which is saying, hey, I need to do something new, so I'm going to smash two things together and see what happens. But he was admiring certain composers who would do that. I'm blanking on the name. Great American composer, string quartet. I won the Pulitzer Prize, and he was sort of a master at classical. Um, oh, it'll come to me, and I don't know why I'm forgetting it. But but yes,
Not Elliot Carter.
no, but
No.
same ballpark. I mean, you're in the ballpark. Uh,
Pearl.
no. Uh, it'll have to just appear.
But it's like with Messiaen. I mean, no one thinks that he destroyed Indian classical music, you know? And you don't get the sense of he's just whatever appropriation means, that that's what he's trying to do when he's literally appropriating all these like rhythmic techniques from India. But you get the sense like he really loved all the rhythmic permutations that there were in North Indian classical music, and then it just came out in the music that he wrote. It's not like he was trying to smash. It's like he loved two things, and then it just became him.
I don't know how to live as a human being except to be curious, and in curiosity be fascinated, and in fascination find love in it, and love to be myself changed. And if my composition is going to be myself, it's going to involve the things that have changed me, whether they come from my immediate culture or not. But that's a far cry from the just complaints of people who uh, exoticize others, and then truly appropriate in a comic or a cartoonish way, appropriate certain things, and then
Exploitative.
exploit it and then they gain from it. And meanwhile, what's left behind is an actual culture, or an art that has now been in, if it goes well, what's popularized is the cartoon version. Meanwhile, the true culture or art is left unloved, and that's what's wrong. But I don't think that's what we're talking about here.
And that works with your paradigm because, like, you don't do that if you come at it with love.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great way. It's like you have your own style, and you take a Gullah spiritual, and suddenly you make electroacoustic music with a
Right.
a polyrhythmic drum beat to it, but it's influenced by Gullah spiritual, but it came out of love. It's like do your thing, or so.
And the I suppose the accounting of it would look something like this. If you were to find out, it would be when people come to know this. Do they come to love the Gola song that you're arranging, and do they come to want to know more about it and to learn? Well, then maybe it's been good. But on the other hand, if they come to a poor understanding and a false caricature, then it's artistic dishonesty, which I believe in. Your friend's idea that don't innovate for the sake of innovation reminds me of a Wendell Berry saying from Life is a Miracle, which is a wonderful book. I love it. But he says he says we need to prize familiarity above innovation, because innovation is always going to be, and I'm paraphrasing at this point, innovation is always going to be limited by our fallenness and our own limits. We can only innovate to the extent that we are ourselves limited. But familiarity is as limitless as life itself. Because life, any small thing or anything that you become fascinated with and love is going to draw you ever in, and it's not going to be exhausted. The smallest things, you love a certain flower, you can learn to become more and more familiar with that flower, and it will not end, because that limitation is not yours. It's the limitation of life and creation. And since God is unlimited, becoming familiar with what God, and now I'm way beyond Wendell Berry, but becoming familiar with God has made is limitless. And that inspires me.
That's beautiful. It
Hello, everyone. Would you please consider supporting me on Patreon? I'm really enjoying making this podcast as a means of having interesting conversations with people in the arts and those who are interested in promoting beauty, especially in the liturgical arts. But I'm also doing this as a means of trying to help support my family. So if you would prayerfully consider supporting me on Patreon, it would mean the world to me. The first 20 people in the United States who sign up at any financial level, be that the $5 level or above, will get a free copy of my CD, Bach's Organ Mass, recorded on the Trost organ in Waltershausen. Thank you for your support.
It strikes me that I've been thinking a lot about what is beauty itself, and I would love to have everyone wants to attack the objectivity of beauty, and they're like, no, it's like in the eyes of the beholder. I disagree, because I think everyone can look at some downtown landscape that's full of like stupid monoliths of glass and steel beams and say, no, that's ugly. And I don't know exactly where to draw the line of where to say this is beautiful and this is ugly, because there's like a conservative tendency, like if you have more of a conservative aesthetic or ethos, where you want to just cut off. It's like, oh, when everything that's modern is bad, everything that's like innovative is bad. But I'm not totally there, because for example, like there would be some who would say, oh, Messiaen, that's just modernist nonsense. But for me, Messiaen is the pinnacle of 20th century music. I mean, it's the best, and everything has its place, even Penderecki has its place. But I think there's something maybe philosophically, if you're thinking about beauty, Dionysius, the Areopagite, talks about beauty as one of the divine names, because sort of like beauty, goodness, and truth, how ultimately they're convertible, as Aquinas would say, because at the beautiful, the good, the true is God himself. And I think there's also, it says God is love. Right? So maybe you could say love, beauty, goodness, and truth. These are all names for God that are ultimately convertible. And so I wonder if there's some means of saying, of being able to tie in love as the mechanism of determining, oh, this is ugly, like this really is ugly. and this really is beautiful. And I don't know exactly how to parse that out, but I feel like there's something there.
Mhm.
The problem is you can love what you create and it still be bad, you know? Like you can create like a bad sweater that you absolutely loved. That's just totally kitsch and has no aesthetic value except to yourself. But then again, I feel like there are some composers, and feel free to disagree with me on this, but like Stockhausen, for example, whose entire project is deconstruction itself. Like he's really trying to smash something, you know? And there's always vestiges of beauty everywhere because God created the world and God is the creator. So even in some horribly satanic composition, you can still find some vestiges of beauty because, well, guess what? It's God's world. But it does still beg the question, do you think do you see where I'm going, and do you think there is something along the lines of love itself that's like the means of the aesthetic canon of judgment or
Mm.
something like that?
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of questions. I mean, a lot of tr possible paths in there. Um, one is the question of can I'd put it this way: is there any kind of art that can actually escape a Christian aesthetic critique? Uh, where as in everything. You said, well, how did you put it? You said, well, there's a place for everything. Even Stockhausen, you said, and that's one set of questions. Another one is the connection between love and beauty, which I think is a pretty powerful idea. Um, Not an easy one to tackle, as the history of aesthetics has shown. But I think maybe so. I'm interested in something related, and maybe it's a path. I'm interested in the connection between aesthetics and ethics. Um, and
Tell me more. Yeah.
well, and so if there is a connection, as I think, between aesthetics and ethics, then perhaps that's where love enters the picture. Uh, in the sense that some I think Carol Wojtyla and maybe Dietrich, what's his name? His friend who wrote on aesthetics. I got his book. Let's see, where is it? Uh, Trying to look for the name of the book. Not Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but another Dietrich. The thought is that aesthetics is actually prior to ethics, because in a sense, ethics fundamentally is the love of the beautiful, the good, the
Hmm.
beautiful. And this, I'm no Plato expert at all, but I think there is some roots in Plato in this uh, that we actually pursue what's good because we perceive it as beautiful. We don't first we don't first obey because of a doctrine of ethics. We first obey because we want to be like that, or we are imitating the good, we are imitating the beautiful, or because we see an action and it's a beautiful and good action. And I think there's a hint of this in Scripture. I think about when Jesus. You remember the story of the broken perfume? And she comes in, and the disciples are, this woman of ill repute comes in, and she has saved this precious nard, and she breaks it and pours it over Jesus. And disciples think, well, ethically, the right thing to do would have been to sell it and use the money and give the money to the poor. That's ethics. But Jesus' response is telling, because what Jesus says is, leave her alone. She has done a beautiful thing.
Hmm.
I don't know. I may be pushing a point, but I feel like his appeal to beauty in the context of ethics, it might be a little hint that we need to look more at what are beautiful things to do. I don't want to go crazy there. We also need to follow the law of God, certainly. And, um, I mean, bring back Stockhausen, who thought that 9/11 was this work of art, and in that sense was a beautiful thing. Did he even say that? I think he said it was the greatest work of art of all time, or maybe he said it was the most beautiful, but he said something outlandish at that time.
He said
But
all kinds of outlandish things.
yes, uh, but that what she did was beautiful, and that the master pointed out the beauty of what she had did. So this connection between beauty and that and ethics, and which is why my interest is in seeing how possibly corruption of aesthetics or the relativization of aesthetics uh, inevitably can lead to the corruption of ethics, because they're both on shaky ground in the eyes of the world, but aesthetics is the low-hanging fruit. I wonder if society first relativizes aesthetics, and then we say things like beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and it's all a matter of taste. And I mean, that I think that's a done deal, at least in the world that I inhabit. I virtually meet I meet almost no one who would agree with me that when I say such and such is, well, to use C.S. Lewis' example, that the waterfall is sublime, uh, that I'm not talking about my own feelings there. That if someone were to come back and say, I'm getting this from Abolition of Man, this isn't my own idea, I say the waterfall is sublime, and somebody says, well, what you really mean is you have sublime feelings. And but no, what I'm saying is, because if that were the case, I wouldn't say I have sublime feelings. I'd say I have humble feelings. I'm not sublime. I don't feel sublime. What I am saying, at least grammatically, is the waterfall is sublime, and the feelings that I have of reverence toward it aren't just because I happen to have reverential feelings. What I'm saying is there's something about that waterfall that causes my feelings of reverence, and those feelings of reverence are right and just. And if I did not have these feelings of reverence, there would be something wrong with me. I don't think anybody thinks that way that I encounter. That when I say the Jupiter Symphony is a sublime masterwork, and I find the right words to describe it, I'm not talking about my state of things. I don't care whether I feel that way or not. What I'm saying is Mozart's work there, he has done something that should cause certain admiration. And if it doesn't, I don't understand enough, or I'm not, or something is going wrong with me. So that leads me to think that aesthetics can be corrupt and fallen, just as ethics can be. At least in the Christian world, it's generally easy to argue that our moral sensibilities, we humans have a moral faculty that is part of our being made in the image of God, and that our moral capacity can be broken, bent, misshaped, dead, but can also be redeemed. I want to say we, being made in the image of God, also have an aesthetic faculty that, just like God said, that's beautiful when he made the world, we have a God-given response to look at what's beautiful and say, that's beautiful, that's good. But that our aesthetic faculty can also be bent, misshapen, corrupted, dead, but can also be redeemed and rebuilt and remade. Where I'm interested is where the aesthetic faculty and the ethical faculty, where they're given priority, and I'm increasingly starting to believe that the aesthetic faculty is prior to the ethical faculty. But that if I were the devil and I wanted to ruin the world, I'd start by getting rid of the aesthetic faculty, and that'll give me the chance to go after the moral faculty, and then I can go after the epistemological faculty, because I have a hunch that that's further still. We find things to be beautiful, including actions. Our ethics are based on our aesthetics, and our epistemology, I'm going way out on a limb here, somehow is tangled up in our ethics. And if you want to topple the whole system, start with aesthetics, That you can get rid of pretty quick, and I think history's shown societies start there. Then you can get rid of ethics. Then you get rid of epistemology, and then you're in the kind of situation we're seeing in society. There, that was a lot.
Interesting. No, I think I agree with you. I think people would point out. I think it's easily. I think you can contend with this. So I don't think it's like a blow to your argument. But there's been like fascist regimes, I think Germany in World War II, who were on this like crusade to destroy what was considered modernist art. I mean, even the Soviet Union had like a crusade against modernist art that, everyone knows, like Shostakovich is trying to work around the Soviet regime, but you can think the same and in World War II and Germany, where there definitely was like an appreciation for Bach, an appreciation for Wagner, like a big appreciation for the arts and for classical music. And I feel like some people would point to that, but
Right.
as an argument against what you're saying. But I think there's a way probably of arguing against that where it maybe tying in sort of how Dante sees, the levels of hell being as it's actually love for a thing that's misappropriated. And so like love, like too much love for food is then a vice, and so too much love at any level of the ontological hierarchy sort of confines you or to that level of hell.
Right.
So maybe I'm just
Well, it's true, and it should give such, I mean, that history should give such alarming warnings to all of us, and we have to know that history first to start with, and it should alarm us to such an extent that we will avoid those devastating mistakes at whatever cost. But it would be a mistake also to ruin humanity in a new way because we didn't do the hard thing of finding the narrow path. We just bulldozed the whole project. If that makes sense. And to put it more specifically, the mistakes, far more the mistakes, the wickedness that led to such oppression and mass murder in the name with using whether it's religion or art or any other utility by which you can convince masses that what is evil is good, that that the mistake also was not just that they loved Bach. That wasn't
right.
the mistake. Bach is lovable. Bach is good. It wasn't because that they did that, but it was because more deeply, there were people that wanted to be godlike. They wanted to reshape a world in their own image, and they needed a means to do it. I'm no profound historian, but I think it would be a pretty impossible case to make that the cause of whether it's the cause of Nazi Germany's actions or the cause of the Soviet Union's actions or anything like that, that the cause was their art was just too good.
Yeah, fair enough.
Um,
Yeah, that would be a silly argument. Well, I would also love to ask, if you don't mind, I've been working on, I sort of have like a conception of how postmodernism, the philosophy itself, vis-a-vis its like critique of hierarchies as such, plays in with like the progression of aesthetics from medieval times. And so, if you don't mind, let me take like 2 minutes and recount sort of my hypothesis and see if you agree or disagree, because I feel like you'd have super interesting thoughts on it.
please.
And that I feel like in the medieval world especially, there was a more robust ontological hierarchy. And so everything was seen as enchanted. You can think there's like no nominalism, or nominalism has come to play, but it hasn't like been incarnated into the way that people perceive reality. So rather than just seeing like us and the supernatural, there was, ironically, there was less of a dichotomy between the natural and supernatural, but there was this idea of the ontological hierarchy where we are actually the bodies of principalities, in the sense of, we are our own selves, but we're also part of a city, for example. And a city as maybe a hyper agency, as they would say now, does exist at like a higher level. And of course, you have the idea of like super ancient, the gods, but then this sort of becomes reappropriated into the saints, with very important distinctions, of course, being made in that like they're not to be worshipped rather than God, but they're venerating them as a worship to God. And not to get into the later Protestant, arguments against that, but just to say this is part of the mentality. So there's this super robust hierarchy, and everything exists within an ontological hierarchy, and sure, maybe even society does itself, because like the nobility and royalty, and like Dionysius the Areopagite sees the structure of church hierarchy as being itself a representation of sorts of the ontological hierarchy itself. And then he sees within angels even a hierarchy, so you have higher and higher forms of angels, so everything is hierarchical.
Okay.
Then you move into like the Enlightenment, and you've sort of taken nominalism as a presupposition, and so that everything that we perceive epistemologically, it doesn't actually correspond to the forms. It's just structures in our mind that we're superimposing upon the world to try to understand it, but it's not actually real. It's just a means of understanding it, which of course then makes possible like the philosophies of Kant, for example. Before we get to Kant, the so there sort of seems to be a flattening of.
I still haven't gotten to Kant, so that's okay.
Yeah, there sort of seems to be a flattening of the hierarchy, and I think you see this some in the Protestant Reformation as well, where it's like we don't need the mediators. We have one mediator between God and man. Again, not to get into a big theological thing, but just to say how there's a change in perception, where rather than now like God, the priest, the saints, Mary, Jesus, God, me. And this is sort of reflected everywhere, even with these like egalitarian like the push for egalitarianism, the push for revolution of various sorts, so that now rather than this robust ontological hierarchy, now there are two. And you almost see this aesthetically for me musically in the move from Renaissance counterpoint, and then even the Baroque, which still has multiple levels of music all simultaneously, into the galant, where it's also two. It's the melody and the harmony. And people are also, because of what's come before them, they're playing around with counterpoint and whatnot, but ultimately the aesthetic is two. And then you have sort of like Rousseau's, like the way Rousseau works into all of this, and why he hates Bach, but he loves the new opera. Then Kant, there's a little bit of a shift, because Kant's Copernican revolution of philosophy. There's a philosopher, John Vervaeke, who says that for Plato to move into the rational is to move into the real. But for Kant, because he's flipped everything up on its head, to move into the irrational is to move into the real. So therefore, the only method of understanding like ourselves or reality is actually to move into the phenomenal rather than the noumenal. And so that sort of creates the birth of Romanticism. And so that plays with the hierarchy, but in a different way, because now the primary aesthetic is to like incite the passions and to create, moving musical music. But then when you get to the dawn of the 20th century, you see the thing with hierarchy totally coming back, where it's like, now let's destroy the hierarchy of pitches so that we have the pure Schoenberg, the emancipation of dissonance. And then ultimately, the only real way of achieving radical egalitarianism is by a superimposition of order. So whether it be tone rows or other things, until you finally get to Babbitt and total serialism. And so there's that radical paradox of the only way of getting total freedom is by total tyrannical order. Postmodernism comes, right, which then is a critique of all of hierarchy as such. It's a Nietzschean hermeneutic of suspicion against all hierarchies of power. And what it does is it sort of destroys the whole Enlightenment project, or at least it seeks to. And it's a mixed bag of mostly bad but some good. And so then, because of that, the sort of paradox is that because you've destroyed like this one cogent project aesthetically that's been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years, nonetheless you actually allow the recapitulation of other meta-narratives, because in order to deconstruct a meta-narrative, you have to recapitulate the meta-narrative that you're deconstructing. And so then it actually takes away all your criteria for judgment, where you really can't go against. It's difficult to say that any music doesn't stand on its own. And so then for me, the ultimate sort of Christ trampling down death by death is that then you have Arvo Pärt become one of the most performed classical music composers of the 20th century, who, in it seems like postmodernism sort of allows the space for an Arvo Pärt to emerge, who's Estonian Orthodox, super conservative, super Christian, but it actually sort of creates the space to allow for something like that. And of course, it's like a chaotic space, but that chaotic space allows for the recapitulation of true Christian aesthetic and true Christian art in a weird sort of paradoxical way. And so this is sort of my accounting for how the philosophy of the ontological hierarchy sort of has played itself out through musical aesthetics. And so sorry that took me like 3 or 4 minutes to explain.
No, fascinating.
But I feel like if anyone would have really interesting thoughts about that, or could totally destroy the way that I'm thinking about it, it would be you. So how does that strike you?
I just write fugues. That's all I do. So I don't know.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, it's an interesting story to tell of it from what I understand. If there is an avenue for critique, it's probably in the particulars. That is to say, a sweeping, because that's all you had time for, a sweeping story of and kind of telling a parallel story of a story of the development of hierarchical structures in philosophical thought and arguably in society. That's already 2 parallel stories. How did the development of major thinkers over time parallel society's approach to hierarchical structures and religious societies and all that? But then another parallel story of how did music develop, and especially how did the approach to, say, dissonance or form or any of these things or all that, how does that parallel? It reminds me of one of my great teachers, Joseph Strauss, phenomenal theorist and great teacher. He developed the field of disability studies in music in a major way. He was a major developer of that field. And well, I think it was.
I don't know what that is. Just for what is disability studies in music?
It's in the in the 2000s. It's what you're saying. It's
so it's like women's studies or something like that.
Something like that.
Oh, okay.
But it's really become quite an interesting field. But it started. Here's one, and it's been a long time since I've thought this, so I want to do honor to my great teacher. But one of his early articles, I think it was his, was similarly mapping 2 stories next to each other: the story of disability, especially in the church, and the story of dissonance. So very quickly, early on, and these are, well, I guess the weakness of both these, and it's where I'm going. The weakness, if there's a place for critique, it breaks down the particulars. So we just have to tell this broad stroke story. Dissonance starts as the diabolos in music. Dissonance is an evil in a sense. Dissonance is something to be rejected because it is not pure. It's not like God. It's not natural. Well, let's avoid the word natural, but there's something at least metaphorically wicked, sinful about dissonance, and so thus to be avoided. But then post-Enlightenment, and then similarly, disability, early disability is seen as, well, a curse, or did you sin? Who sinned, you or your father? Because that made you blind.
Which is a funny one, because like, how could he have sinned if he was born blind?
Right.
Was that was that like a Second Temple Jewish belief in reincarnation, or
Yeah, right.
anyway?
What's causing it?
Sort of
It's just this
aside.
need to blame. Is it my fault or their
Right.
fault? But even in the medieval church, a disability or a misfortune could be seen as, what is God doing to you? What did you do that God caused this? Or if not God, the gods or your demons or the spirits or whatever. Something, your misfortune is caused and is bad. Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment, let's go back to dissonance. Post-Enlightenment, dissonance in music becomes not so much, it's not the diabolos in music, it is something to be resolved. Dissonance is part of the musical world, but it's something, you like take a suspension, you start with consonants, you move on toward a suspension, you resolve it, and you resolve it in a rational way. Similarly, disability became not so much a curse but it became a problem to be solved. Fast forward, again in our huge broad strokes, fast forward, and in the postmodern age, in the later on, dissonance is not a curse, it's not the devil in music, it's also not something to be solved or resolved. Dissonance is emancipated, and dissonance is just one of a variety of tonal sensations. There's different kinds of intervals. Some of them have this sound, and some of them have this sound. A seventh is one type of sonority, and a fifth is another type of sonority. They're just different. And similarly, disability comes to be seen not as a curse, nor a problem to be solved, but as, like the phrase used to be, differently abled. Okay, I am doing a pretty bad job of characterizing an early development in disability studies. Lots in music, a lot has moved on since then. But you get the gist? You're telling two parallel stories, and you're seeing how they kind of map onto each other. The critique of that story is, it doesn't really work out in the details. The story of how medievals viewed disability is actually nuanced and sophisticated, and a variety of opinions there, and not everybody felt, and same thing in the Enlightenment, and same thing in the 20th century. We can say Schoenberg, we can use Schoenberg, his Emancipation of the Dissonance, to represent 20th century approaches to dissonance, but that simply is not true or fair, because the variety of uses of dissonance is wide in the 20th century. And so it cannot stand for a whole type. In the same way, the avenue for critique of your idea, which is a wonderful and huge, I mean, you should write a giant book about it. It would be 900 pages. The critique would be would be in the particulars. So back to this hierarchical, the rise and fall and new rise of hierarchical structures. Is this a fair summary? Hierarchical structures were assumed, but then they began to be kind of inverted, but that led to, in postmodern, just on one hand, a dismantling because of a suspicious of hierarchical structures, but that actually covertly or surprisingly gave rise to at least a path for a huge ascendance of hierarchical structures, just as long as they're compartmentalized. Is that roughly
something like that? I mean, I think the inversion thing is sort of like the postmodern push. I think the hierarchy is more or less flattened first, and then it's and then there's the attempt to destroy it, and then in the attempt to destroy it, then the inversion takes place, and inversion sort of becomes the mechanism for recapitulation.
Right.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the particulars, you cited Nietzsche, rightly so, as a kind of foundational thinker that 20th century has sort of caught up with. But Nietzsche is complicated.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nietzsche's great. He's horrible and he's great.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Brilliant. Absolutely. Wish he weren't so influential. But on the one hand, some of his ideas about how we attain to the superhuman, how we can, we have to eliminate Judeo-Christian values. We need a transvaluation of all values because we need to return to a valuation of strength, fit, survival of the fittest applied to society in one sense. Well, this type of thinking is, I mean, you can draw a straight line to Hitler. I mean, you can say, if you start to think, or to America's eugenics programs, it doesn't have to. We don't have to say Hitler. We can say our own eugenics programs. Draw a straight line to thinking that, look, we are only going to achieve a transcendent status if we start eliminating this stupid Judeo-Christian. You're going to put this in context, I hope. Stupid Judeo-Christian, dying for the weak, giving yourself up
clip
on behalf
just this
of
part and put it at the beginning.
Yeah.
We should eliminate the.
But I mean, in Nietzsche's mind, and he's right. He's kind of right in a sort of surface sense. How stupid to have the strong give themselves up on behalf of the weak. That is a recipe for building a weak society. What we need is a transvaluation of values. Okay, but Nietzsche said other stuff also. And Nietzsche was against. I mean, Nietzsche was a champion. I mean, he was angry with Wagner for Wagner's racism, and he was, so I kind of think Nietzsche would have been appalled at where some people took his ideas, and yet it's impossible to not think that he started it all, So what all that is just to say, as with everything, it's complicated. And so the story of music, likewise, the story of music, the tale that you want to tell only works by kind of, I don't want to say cherry picking, but by holding up exemplars in the right order. It's like how evolutionary biologists will tell the tale. They've got to assemble the evidence in the way that works and never mind the gaps, and just hope that the gaps work out. I have no problem with that.
Sure, but just because there are exceptions doesn't mean that. This is another thing, of course, I have an issue with the way that all philosophy is done now, or the way that anything is done ever, is it's almost impossible to think symbolically now, because every symbol is just a recognition of a pattern, and it's as though modern society has an aversion to patterns because they say, well, there's an exception to the pattern. I'm like, yeah, but the exception proves the rule.
Yeah. And so we doubt everything and all that kind of thing.
You can't make any generalization about anything, except you can,
Right. Chesterton has some wisdom there, when I think it's Everlasting Man, or maybe was one of them, his quip about we've put humility in the wrong place. We're trying to be humble, but our false humility causes us to doubt that we can know anything. But we don't doubt ourselves. It's an overconfidence in our particular certainty, but it's a doubt on the ability to know things at all. And he said we've got our humility all inverted. We need to be humble in our own particular certainty, but we don't need to doubt the possibility of knowledge itself.
That's good. That's like I have a family friend who is very, very intolerant of anyone that he perceives as being intolerant. So, it's like, I'm the most tolerant person, except for all of my uncles and grandparents and father, like,
Right.
everybody that I think isn't as tolerant as I am.
Yeah. The
So,
classic defeat of postmodern viewpoint is by what privileged standpoint do you discredit all privileged standpoints? Which, the idea that uh, there's a standpoint at which you can take that lets you see all the standpoints and declare them all invalid. Well, which standpoint is that?
yeah,
Is your
that's
own
good.
standpoint the one that's invalid? Yeah, it was
Well,
but
speaking of all,
yeah,
sorry, what?
no, go ahead.
Well, speaking of all these aesthetic considerations and whatnot, I know that you're well versed in 20th century compositional techniques, and
Dabble.
you dabble, and you've had multiple teachers who that's like their big thing, and I know you've had some big influences, like George Pearl was a big influence, right?
Right.
How would you define yourself, your personal aesthetic with regards to composition? How is it that you write? And I would venture to say it probably changes depending on the medium. I mean, I'm just guessing. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but just from listening to some of your stuff, that you might be a little more what's the word for experimenting with like a solo instrument than maybe you would be with a choir and accompaniment, just from the sheer practicality of being able to write something that people will perform. But I could be wrong. So what is your personal methodology with
Yeah.
composition?
Well, thank you for that question, but it's in progress and always will be. But there is a trajectory to it that I perceive in my work, and it has to do with what we said before. The trajectory is moving toward humanity, toward um, reality outside of myself. What Berry calls an external audit. Um, Here's what I mean by that. The a younger John composing would compose almost like the isolated artist of the romantic, where all that matters is my internal audit. All that matters is the purity of my art form conceived in my imagination and my mind. And that manifests itself sometimes as music that only I could love. Music that is for no one but myself. And an accusing, and which typically goes with this, the accusation that the world just doesn't understand, or the world just needs to finally learn. They just and that is a tendency of any artist, of lots of artists, I would suppose, and shows itself up in music history in various ways. Um, and it's the temptation of the artist, because we pretend like that's the mark of genius. And that's a romantic story. That's a that's a character in the history of music that I think anybody on this side of studying the history of music admires and esteems too. And so for a composer and an artist, that can be tricky. You want to be like those geniuses that people just didn't understand, and all that. So
Wasn't this
that's
a Beethoven thing? Just for
sure.
like he
Beethoven.
was sort of the first one that was the ideal of the romantic artist.
I think there may be examples before Beethoven. Beethoven is sort of the quintessential first version of this.
Mm.
And then through the 19th century, it just continues, and well into the 20th century, that character um, is a character. They'll understand him later, and there's something about that. I mean, because there is such a thing as an internal audit, and this balance between internal and external audit. The internal audit is the one that is the thing that I think that I'm getting this from Wendell Berry, but I might have made this up. It's probably Wendell Berry, but um, The internal audit is that voice inside you that says that insists on truth, insists on authenticity in the best sense of the term, honesty. I'd rather say honesty. Insists on honesty, that it's not a people pleaser. You do this because it's good, not because someone is telling you it's good, because you know it is. And even if the world were to tell you that's not good, you're going to do it anyway because it's good. That's the internal audit, and it's necessary. It has to be balanced with the external audit that says, what are you doing? That says,
Right.
this is good or that. And it can work both ways. An artist can be too self-critical. My wife tells me this is my tendency. I can be too self-critical, which slows me down. I want it to be perfect. I want it to live up to my standards. And sometimes it just needs to be done. Uh, and so the external audit might be telling you this is good. And you say, no, it's not good. But you need to listen to the external audit that's telling you, no, that is good. Composers are notoriously bad judges of their own music because they hear it you hear it too internally, and it's very hard to step outside and hear it through fresh ears. And so, anyway, uh, I am a story of my composing is the story of trying to rebalance and learn more from the external audit. But also with that goes with the ethics of thinking that my art doesn't exist merely for my own gratification, but that music is something human beings do together. And so my music needs to be for people. So how does that work out? How do you balance artistic integrity with wanting to write music for people? Well, I have not solved this for my own art form. Um, I think, but that balance, music that is to live outside of myself, in service to the Lord, for people, and yet have an artistic integrity that does match the internal audit. How do I bring technique to bear, but not for technique's sake, which might mean suppressing technique? And somewhere in there is the story of my developing art form, and I haven't arrived.
Well, I guess people listening to your music will, be able to discern some sort of, aesthetic influences and that sort of thing. But like orally, what compositional techniques, for example, do you find yourself employing the most? Or obviously, there's probably some intrinsic hierarchy of compositional techniques that you go to first. And so, what might that be?
I don't think that's necessarily true. I'm an omnivore of life. I love experience, and I love technique, and I love knowledge. And so uh I don't you were right before when you said it depends on the medium. That's true. It depends on the medium, but it also depends on the occasion for writing. Um I teach my students to always seek an occasion for writing. I encourage my students not merely to write music and then beg people to perform it, but that to start with an actual occasion, because one, then you know that the music is valued to somebody from the start. And two, the occasion starts the composition. A blank page is intimidating for a student composer, but a circumstance, my church is, a student composer, maybe their church is having a big Easter service, and what they really need is some anthem that's made for that acoustical environment. And because otherwise you might be you're composing for Notre Dame, but what you have is a small room. You need to write for the small room and see what does this environment and these people and our resources, what kind of music is generated from that. And if a student composer can be particular to the circumstance, then they're going to write an honest music. If on the other hand, if they're just writing in their room, usually on their computer, but for me on the desk or whatever, with no regard to anything out in the real world, then then your piece doesn't live until you sort of do a search for the circumstance that matches that piece. But will you ever find it? I don't know. I think better, especially for a student composer. So all that to say, the technique has to match that. So I'm an omnivore, so I want to marshal as much technical resources as I can through ample study and ability. But then when it comes time to compose, I need to know the particularities of what I'm writing for. I need to know where is it intended to be performed and by what forces and under what occasion. I mean, as far as I can tell, what's going to surround it. And acoustical environment is very important to me. Because music performed in one place is not the same music as performed in another. That may be something new, because you know how the history of composition is the history of composers being more particular about what happens in the music. You know, early Baroque, whatever instruments play that range, you get this line: soprano instrument, alto instrument, whatever. And what do you got? A shawm? Okay, we're going to use a shawm. uh, But then composers started to be particular. Well, it can't be just any instrument. It's got to be this instrument. And then dynamics. They began to be particular over dynamics. And then they began to be particular over modes of expression. And articulation became particular. And then more and more things were particular. Well, for me, the acoustical setting becomes particular. And I think with electronic composers, that's important. They want control over the environment.
Do you write any electronic music?
I have, and it's never been I've never achieved real mastery. And but I'm fascinated by it, and but there's a distinction to be made. Back to aesthetics. I have this theory that if there is a kind of first principles of aesthetics, I think maybe one of those first principles might be something like this. The thing, when it comes to imitation, the thing you are imitating, no, the imitator, how do I state this? The thing you're imitating is always going to be superior to the thing that is imitating it. Because, well, let's take digital organs. Here's your world. So a digital organ, they will continue to get better and better and better. But as long as the aim is to imitate a real organ, they will always be inferior, because the thing that they are imitating is by definition the superior.
I'd say there are some advantages, but this probably proves your point in a way. Like, man, I kind of hate digital organs, so this is not a defense by and large of digital organs. But if you have a really amazing organ, one, it can stay in tune. So that's a big benefit. Saves you money.
Right.
If somehow you can maintain the acoustic quality of everything.
Yeah.
But then two, like you have stuff like you can put everything under expression. So I know this guy who's recording the complete Turner organ works. And Charles Maria Mussmann. And he was saying that Turner writes in the music pianissimo, crescendo to forte on like an enchantment. And it's like, you can't do that. So it's like, you sort of have to intuit the Turner is just like it's an effect that he's thinking. Or if you record it on a Hauptwerk, you can actually accomplish everything that Turner wrote into the score, because you can put everything under expression. So, but perhaps that still kind of makes your point, because that is something new. It's not imitating that something exists. So the only benefit that you have is the new qualities of that thing that surpasses what it's imitating.
Right. So with electronic music, I think where it excels is where it is not trying to be an electronic version of acoustic music. Except for, pragmatic, sure, I love the fact that MIDI instruments have been invented. It's been so handy and it's developed, there's so many benefits from the technology, but I think the true art of electronic music is when it accounts for the medium itself and doesn't try to, where it says, well, what is the nature of this medium, and the art comes from that nature. But setting electronic music aside, I'm fascinated by it, but I love acoustic music, and more I've been doing this lately. I am so sad, and it's hard, it's frustrating. Trying to find musical experiences that are pure acoustic is becoming harder and harder. Even the Chattanooga Symphony Orchestra has been in an environment lately, because they've been in an environment where they are having to set up microphones and amplify their instruments. And so I was at
Why?
they are not in the Tivoli. They have had to move because the Tivoli's under construction, so they're in a different large space where they don't feel that the acoustics is really working for the audience. So so I heard Copland's Appalachian Spring, and the clarinet comes in, and I'm watching the clarinetist while I'm listening to it. Comes from a speaker over here, and another thing, if I had more time, maybe you could do this. I want to study the actual effect on our ability to hear music of a lifetime of hearing it mediated through loudspeakers. I want to know the true. I've been thinking about this. I think there are more differences than people recognize. The usual thing is, if you can't tell the difference, except you can tell the difference. Not in terms of necessarily sonic qualities, but for example, you can tell the difference that I see the clarinet there, but the sound is coming from over here. That's a difference. Or
Right.
I know for a fact that clarinets could never be that loud, or various reasons. But it's frustrating to me that I'm finding it very difficult to get pure acoustic experiences that are not modified by electronics. And that frustrates me. I think it makes a difference in the world. And I think there is a difference between hearing a human voice versus hearing it through loudspeakers. And the difference goes beyond frequencies. But that's another podcast.
Sure.
We were talking about technique, and we were talking about techniques I prefer. I mean, I love
Those that are idiosyncratic to you. Like what makes, like, how do you distinguish something from being John Wykoff and not being John Wykoff?
This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with the music that surrounds me. Form. I'm talking larger works. I'm not talking folk song arrangements or anything, but form is something that matters a lot to me. And it doesn't seem to matter to anybody anymore. And that bothers me, but maybe I'm just outdated. But no, there are composers that care about form, but I think there's a certain laziness about form that has set in, or maybe just inexperience. It could be that it could be that it's too hard. The true mastery of form is a long study, and maybe that's just too hard for people. But it's pretty demonstrable in lots of music where, and 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 to be fair, it doesn't seem that people care about it anymore. And maybe that's because of all the reasons you can say about our soundbite world or whatever, that people don't uh if music is a consumable good, people like short consumable goods, so people don't tend to have patience for the kind of time span that form requires.
But it matters, and I think it reveals spiritual truth. Even just sonata form. I think you're the one who first taught me this with the idea of exposition, development, recapitulation. Like that does embody a spiritual truth. Maybe you didn't say this, but I'm not. You know, the to me that's the Neoplatonic, like what is it? Coming like procession and recession, procession and return, how like all things move and have their being in God. So all things come from God and return to God. To me, that is exemplified in sonata form. It's like a metaphysical truth that's being put on display.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think that one came from me, but thanks for the credit for it. Uh, uh, I I think there are many possibilities in the realm of form, but I just mean, even the contemplation of shaping time, is such an important part of composing music. I mean, it's almost synonymous. To compose is to form music. I think of
Hmm.
form as a verb, not as a noun, um, primarily. And so form isn't so much to me, it's not something that you put music into. It's not uh, you need a theme and then you need to modulate and then that's not, to me, that's not form at its core. This summer, my my hobby this summer, my project, my goal for myself was to write a fugue every day before breakfast. A fugue a day before breakfast. I did okay. I missed we went on vacation. I missed lots of days, but I've done pretty well. I've written hundreds of pages of fugue this summer. They're not good. They are textbook. They're generic. My quest was, none of them I would say is inspired, but that's because of time crunch. It really, before breakfast, get up, write a fugue. Um,
That's a very Bach sort of thing to do.
yeah, right.
There's when I was in
None of
Germany,
them,
you know what?
not one of them attained to anything remotely close to a Bachian level of fugue. But that wasn't the goal. The goal was there was something from I'm a composer. I know how to write a fugue. I teach counterpoint. Knowing how to write a fugue is one thing. I'm convinced there is an inner truth that is this sounds so hokey, but I'm convinced, and I think the summer has borne it out in me. There is a kind of inner truth about certain musical disciplines for a composer. It's probably true of any art form or any study. There's an inner truth that can only be revealed through intense, habitual practice of it. And so this summer, writing a fugue every day, a fugue a day before breakfast, I learned things about the nature of music itself that I can't summarize. I've read virtually every counterpoint book I have available. It's not contained in Fuchs, although the thing is, I see it after. So Alfred Mann's The Study of Fugue compiles all these great treatises on fugue. I've read that, but then spending a summer writing a fugue every day before breakfast. Not always before breakfast, not always finished before breakfast, to be honest, and certainly not every day, but lots of fugues. I've learned something about the nature of music that could only be revealed that way, and that I can't really put in words. But now I go back and read the treatises, and I pick up lines and I say, that's it. That's true. I think about Bach, the story of Bach, with CPE, uh, that CPE relates they'd go to a concert, they'd hear the subject of a fugue, and JS would say, on hearing the subject, JS would say, okay, they're going to do concrescens, and he's going to invert at the 12th, and he'd list all the techniques, and when they would happen in the fugue, Papa Bach would, give a little wink and a nod. I love that story. True or not, it's a great story. But that, being able to know what a subject is capable of on hearing it, such that you start to know that this type of subject is limited in these ways, and instantaneously have a feel for it, is more than book knowledge. It's pure experience. But even more than that, fugue is one of these deep compositional things, not because composers just spend time writing fugues. I didn't do this because I expect that in my next pieces I'm going to be writing fugues. That's not what it's about. Just like sonata, every composer. Maybe my next project will be a sonata a day before breakfast. But sonata reveals a certain deep truth about music that whether you are writing sonatas or not, you are going to understand something profound about how music works and how time works, I think, in the same way that fugue and so maybe there's something what you're saying. There is a kind of connection. There's a spiritual reality to be learned from the study of any great thing, and
I was
maybe
going to tell
sonatas.
you, in Germany, I had a professor, and he just taught a class that was the counterpoint of Bach, and his name was Herr Büsing. He was also a composition professor, and one of the assignments one day was just write a subject. That's it. Not write the fugue, just write a subject. And then we'd all turn in our subject, and he'd start playing the subject, and then he would start improvising a fugue just willy-nilly, and he's like, nah, this one doesn't work. And then it's in this one, he's like, oh, this one works. Change this note. And he just, I've never seen someone improvise a fugue so quickly, and he could just without, he's like, oh, this is a nice counter subject, or this counter subject would be better, and just the facility and speed which he was improvising
Yeah.
fugues was insane.
Which is why the story of Bach going to Frederick the Great's palace and being handed after an exhausting day of travel, after being shoved around the palace to tour the hundreds of keyboards he had. This old man with his cataracts and whatever. This old guy that they were hoping to make fun of him because he represented what was old, and Frederick represented what was new, and CPE is his Kapellmeister or whatever. And some think maybe the fugue subject was designed by CPE to be an impossible one, or at least a really thorny one. Because the subject of a musical offering, so Frederick, after an exhausting day, he says, can you show us some fugue? Can you improvise a fugue? I have the subject for you. And he gives him a fugue subject that anybody who knows fugue would say, that is not a good fugue subject. And it may have been designed by CPE. But then Bach sits down and he improvises a 3-part fugue. And then Frederick the Great, as if that wasn't good enough, he says, well, can you do a 4-part fugue? And that's when Bach says, I don't think I would be able to do it justice for your majesty. And perhaps, and so declined. And maybe it was humiliation that motivated him to start on the way back to start a musical offering, which perhaps was a demonstration. It was sort of an in your face, but also an over the top rendering that maybe said, this old guy's got some things to show you. It's just
Yeah, if he doesn't have a treatise, his treatise is the composition.
right.
He doesn't need to write how to play, a keyboard suite. He'll just write, here's the 6 partitas, or he doesn't need to write a treatise on fugue. The Art of Fugue is the greatest treatise on fugue ever written.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's true. That's why it's an inner game. It's something.
Troubles of the world, the troubles of the world, the troubles of the world. Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world. Gone home Amen.